Good afternoon. We will now begin session 2 on underwater domain awareness, security and economic dimensions. The moderator will be Admiral Jayantha Perera, former commander of the Sri Lanka Navy.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I think after a long break, after heavy lunch, we are gathering. I hope our presenters will keep the flow on. And Ambassador Bernard Gunathilaka and members of the Pathfinder, so thank you very much for inviting us today. Pathfinder Indian Ocean Security Conference Phase 3. The second session is on underwater domain awareness, security and economic dimensions. Now, in Indian Ocean, I don't have to elaborate importance of the Indian Ocean today from a keynote speaker and all other speakers also highlighted the importance. But I will mention recently I was in Perth for about 3 weeks back, where the Foreign Minister of Singapore, Dr. Balakrishnan, he mentioned the world's biggest container ship is carrying 24,060 containers at a time. Now, sea is very important to move from A to B, and it came to Sri Lanka also. Now, if you take to transfer all those 24,000 containers, it takes 125 kilometer train to transfer by land. So, ladies and gentlemen, sea is very important. It's paramount important to look after the global commons, space, surface, and underwater as well. So today, normally, generally, what we talk is about maritime domain awareness. That is the normal military sessions, and also very important for the awareness for each country where they have the sea access. That is also our duty, and being a IRA chairman currently, it's Sri Lanka responsibility also. But after 9/11, more emphasis given to underwater domain awareness because of the 9/11 incident. So Americans wanted to have more focus on the underwater domain awareness because of the underwater threat. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if you take the threat perceived underwater, it's starting from World War I, II, that is the Atlantic, Battle of Atlantic. There were some disasters from underwater threat, and also Indo-Pak War, INS Kukri was sunk by a torpedo hit by the Pakistanis, submarines, and also Falkland War and ISS Call. And Sri Lanka, you know that our country had a conflict with LTT, and it was there for last 30 years. Our young officers also there. We had to face severe underwater threats because we are island nation. Most of the things, logistics supply came from sea. So we had to destroy their floating warehouses or logistic supports in deep seas. Because of that, they threatened Sri Lankan Navy assist in harbors. So Colombo Harbour, Trincomalee Harbour, and Galle, KKs, the main 4 harbors that we have, there are severe underwater threats. So now there are radars, there are sophisticated sonars that is to detect underwater threats, even though it's very difficult to manage and deter the human torpedoes where LTT use suicidal missions. Likewise, globally now, the suicidal missions are coming up. I hope Red Sea also, if they start this one, it will be a severe disaster for shipping. And today, President mentioned, even now, the people are facing situations because of this Suez Canal close. You know, the shipping is reluctant to go there. So that is one aspect. That after that, there are economic aspect is that there are minerals. Actually, the world seabed mineral authority could not control. There are commercial people, actually, they are mining those things, and we have to look after the submarine cables and oil and gas exploration and living and non-living resources. Those are the other factors that we have to look at. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further delay, we have eminent panelists here with us today. Privileged to have to host esteemed expert panelists who will discuss these critical topics. The main presenter, Dr. Commander Arnab Das, founder and director of the Maritime Research Center, Pune, India, researcher in Maritime Security Affairs in the Indian Ocean region, maritime strategist and technocrat and entrepreneur. Doctor, floor to you now.
Good afternoon, everybody. This audience is definitely the real warrior to survive after lunch. So thank you very much all for being here. Thank you very much, Pathfinder Foundation, Ambassador Banat Gunatilka sir, and the whole team of Pathfinder for inviting me. And this is a real way forward for our partnership. I mean, I was here 2 years back, and so happy that it has translated into this particular kind of event. I think the chair has very nicely brought out the importance of the underwater domain, and so I will not go into the basics of why this session is there or why this is important, but I just want to kind of highlight that the entire world or the universe is 75% water. So underwater has to get the importance that it deserves, and all of you will understand that most of the challenges and opportunities exist below the surface of the water, and it is very important to explore the underwater. Acoustic capacity is the key, and if you look around, you will find acoustics hardly getting any importance, or people understand very little about the acoustics. So with that premise, I would like to move forward. And the topic is aptly chosen: security and the economic dimension. So I'll cover it under these heads. Now, let us look at the 21st century new global order. Typically, I mean, it has been discussed. I mean, it was very, very encouraging to listen to the Honorable President, and his perspective was really very, very insightful, and I personally learned a lot. And you can see the entire global strategic interactions have now shifted to the tropical waters. And that aspect has to be really kept in mind when we talk about the underwater, because the technology development, particularly in the underwater domain, happened during the Cold War era. And at that time, the theater of operation was the Greenland-Iceland UK gap, because the two superpowers wanted to engage in that particular region. So that technology is far different from what is required in the tropical waters. To give you some numbers, a sonar that was tested there gave 32 nautical miles. And the same sonar, when it comes to our waters, the Indian Ocean, gives you 7 nautical miles. So there is 60% degradation of sonar performance. So what is underwater domain without a sonar? Point number one. Point number two is the biodiversity is the richest in the tropical waters. So the opportunities is huge. There is a lot more to be gained, whether it is for the community or even for the corporates. Fisheries, aquaculture, whole lot of things you can talk about. Even the mineral resources, it's massive. So with this, I would like to take you to the next slide. Now we talk about Indo-Pacific. I mean, the Honorable President talked about the various definitions or understanding of the Indo-Pacific. But one dimension of the Indo-Pacific is, by definition, it is the tropical waters of the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. And unless you understand the UDA for the tropical waters, I don't think we have the right way of moving forward. So the tropical aspect is extremely important. And if you get a deterioration of the sonar performance of the order of 60%, I mean, typically, largely this part of the world has this conventional thinking of importing technology and know-how. It is not just the technology, but we also try and get the deployment strategy also. If your sonar is giving you 60% degraded performance, then how can you have the same deployment pattern? And I'm not just talking about the security, even there is so much happening in the non-military domain also. Now, the strategic perspective, we have to balance people, economy and nature. When I say people, I'm talking about the coastal and the riverine community. Many times our definition of development completely ignores the communities. I mean, we get confused, whose development are we talking about? So, inclusive governance is something we really need to be worried about. And what are the livelihood potential? I mean, typically, you will see all the big projects, it's a massive cause of displacement for the local communities, and they are completely ignored, and then it becomes a security challenge after some time. But can we not, I will answer this question, can we not build something for them? The second is economy. I mean, the chair has really brought out very clearly, I mean, connectivity through water, not just trade, even communities getting connected. And Indian Ocean has been a civilizational legacy where this entire region was so well connected. And of course, we talked about resources and energy security and a whole lot of aspects. And the third is nature. We talk about climate change, but can you really do climate change assessment without having the underwater domain awareness? Sustainable blue economy, I mean, there's a lot of talk, but we really, I mean, even when we talk about the EV, is it really sustainable? I mean, we have to have a holistic understanding. I'm not going into the details of that. And the third most important is acoustic habitat degradation. Sound is the only signal that propagates effectively underwater. Speed of sound in air is 345 meters per second. Speed of sound underwater is 1500 meters per second. 5 times better. So if all these activities that we are talking about, all the entrepreneurial activities that we are talking about, what impact does it have underwater? If we talk about sonars, then the marine mammals, of course, use acoustic vision. They use sound for all the biologically critical functions, whether it is communication, navigation, you name it. Breeding, finding mates, everything, foraging. So they use sonar better. I mean, during my PhD, I actually studied the dolphins to understand how they use sound. And I developed a classification algorithm for naval applications based on how they do things. So acoustic habitat degradation is becoming a very, very important thing. The International Maritime Organizations recognized acoustic habitat degradation. In fact, there's a lot of talk. In fact, we are happy to tell you that our paper was sent by the Government of India, and now in MEPC 76 is got included as a information paper. Now in 81, I think it will be talked about. Now, Indian Ocean region, just to quickly go through, I don't need to tell this audience, strategic relevance is already discussed. Geopolitical and geostrategic reality. What I want to highlight here is the fragmentation. The nations in the region are not even talking to each other properly. But what is important here, not just the political volatility, but the demographic bulge. I would use the word bulge. I mean, if we just talk about the BIMSTEC, 25% of humanity resides in this region. And these are young aspirational population. The West is getting old. If these people can be channelized correctly, we can actually drive global agenda from here. And it is rightly so shifting to this area. So the capacity and capability building becomes the key to this. When we talk about bilateral or multilateral partnerships, we straight away jump into some solutions. Solutions will not come unless, I mean, like we also talked about Sri Lanka's situation, how they handle great power rivalry. Even when we are talking to people, if we don't have understanding, I'm not particularly talking about Sri Lanka, I'm no expert on Sri Lanka, but what I'm trying to say is, unless we understand the domain well, we will not be able to pick and choose the right thing that we want. Typically, it is a canned solution that comes from the West and the entire package is given to us. We don't even need 10% of it. There are umpteen examples that we can talk about. But if we know what is the problem and what we want, Then we can go out to 10 people, take what they have to offer or what we need. Then it rationalizes. Then we don't become dependent on one. I'll explain this in some time. Now, this is the price we are paying. I mean, these are live examples. Of the first one is a 42 feet blue whale standing west of India. Second is 50 feet bride whale, again west of India. And then the third is 90 pilotless whales in Tuticorin, very close to Sri Lanka. This is the price we are. The big whales are not supposed to be seen north of Sri Lanka. This, I have written a paper that this is the anti-piracy operation that has been going on since 2009. It's a very detailed paper I have written. It is acoustic habitat degradation. So when we talk about development, we have to also understand acoustic habitat degradation. 2018, there were 80 big whale strandings in the Maharashtra coast alone. There's an Indian state in the west, 720 kilometers of coastline. They had 80 big whale strandings. So this is a very serious issue we need to all understand. Now we talk about maritime domain awareness. I have a problem with maritime domain awareness in the conventional sense because the way it has been defined, I would like to call it an event driven. 9/11 globally and 26/11 in our part of the world. And as usual, when something happens, there's a lot of discussions, a lot of talk, but no substance. Sorry to be very blunt. Maritime domain awareness has remained a security-driven formulation. In the last Tokyo summit of the Quad, they talked about greater public good. Do the security agencies understand what is greater public good? And even what was discussed, I mean, it's not just me, there's a lot of chatter in the experts community also. What is greater? I mean, they said even data sharing. And that too through those 8 fusion centers that we have globally, all are military driven. Do they even understand what the communities need? Can they serve what is required for the greater public good? I have a paper, we can discuss that in some other discussion. So there is a problem with the conventional understanding of MDA. Because if you have to include UDA in the conventional MDA, then it has to have acoustic capacity building at its core. And what is MDA? If 90% of everything is happening below the surface of the water, what purpose does MDA serve without UDA? Now, just to quickly talk about the stakeholders, security is just one part of the larger thing. And when we talk about security, we largely discuss, or it is largely driven by the external security agencies, which is largely led by Navy of the various countries. And if you talk about just the Navy, it is just probably one of the 3 security establishments or the maritime forces, and in that also it is part of the 4. So blue economy, environment, and science and technology. Just to quickly elaborate, I mean, when we talk about security, internal security gets completely misunderstood. I mean, armies are not, capable of understanding what is underwater domain. When we talk about transboundary rivers, when we talk about water bodies in the freshwater systems, we completely ignore that part as a constituent of the security formulation. And we talked about 26/11. Kasab and his friends came by a surface boat. And so in our matrix, we are still hoping that the next guy will also come by a surface boat. What about underwater robotics? The chair mentioned about LTT. LTT, and I have written a paper 15 years back, and a terrorist group from Iran, they had underwater capabilities way back 30 years back. And we are still not prepared. Our maritime forces are still not prepared for an underwater attack. So we have to solve tomorrow's problem, not yesterday's problem. And of course, migration by sea. This part of the world is going to see massive, the unequitable distribution of wealth is so much more. This migration is going to become a serious problem. So these are some of the security challenges, non-conventional security challenges we have to be really aware of. And today, underwater robotics is being done by school children. I have been part of a AUV competition in Singapore where college students had come up with very fantastic ideas of underwater drone. So security establishments have to really understand this. Now talking about blue economy, of course, Indian Ocean is the hub for energy security. The second picture that you see, food security. We are increasingly looking at the oceans for food security. But what we forget is the fisheries. When we talk about fisheries, there's a Colorado University report which says that since 1996, the fish stock is on the decline. Fish stock globally is on the decline. But the bycatch is of the order of 80%. How do we rationalize this? I mean, on one end, we are going down in terms of the stock, and the bycatch is of the order of 80%. How do we reconcile this? Then, of course, deep sea mining. Now, Chair mentioned about International Seabed Authority. I mean, this is something, I mean, even they are not able to figure out. I mean, the Secretary General was in India, and I was also invited for a round table. They are also still figuring out what to do, how to, I mean, there are countries like even India who have spent massive amount of money for the exploration part, but the exploitation rights have not been given because they are still, and then there are countries like France which have not been part of the earlier initiative. So now they are saying, now you've messed up enough on land, don't go touch the sea. So, I mean, there are a whole lot of geopolitical issues that are being discussed. Now, even in the freshwater system, there is a lot to be seen. I mean, so the UDA that we talk about covers the entire marine and the freshwater systems. I'll not go into the details of this. I mean, inland water transport is being talked about so much. People don't understand what is dredging. Now, dredging has become the de facto tool for navigability. What happens to the benthic ecosystem? Now, there are ports, I don't want to name, there are very massive ports which have become unviable because of the dredging budget has become far beyond what they can manage. So we have to, because we are running to the Nordic countries for solutions. Do the Nordic countries understand what is tropical waters? Now again, disaster management and again, sustainability. I mean, acoustic habitat degradation has to become one of the mainstream discussions. Otherwise, the way that activities are increasing, we will have serious issues. And science and technology. I mean, how do we get more and more science and technology? I mean, we talk about digital world, but when we say digital ocean, really, how many of us really understand what is digital underwater? I'll not go into the details. I mean, if we talk about Indian Ocean, we have very little understanding of what are the species that exist. Unless we understand that, we have better domain awareness, we can't even navigate sustainability. And then, you know, if we just talk about India, our EZ is 3.7 million lakh square kilometers. Can we put sensors? I mean, the conventional Western way is we'll put sensor and map the whole area. How many sensors can we put? Is it viable to even think like that? What about modeling and simulation? But that requires a different understanding. So this is the framework. I would request you to pay attention to this slide. This is the UDA framework that we have proposed. What it means is the horizontal construct is the 4 stakeholders that we are talking about. Strategic security, which includes both internal and external security. Blue economy with all the components, whether it is fisheries, aquaculture, everything. Third is environment and climate change, or sustainability and climate change. And fourth is digital transformation. Now, all of them together, I mean, it is particularly important for the Indian Ocean region, which is a tropical water. Unless we focus on the acoustic capacity building, we don't go anywhere. If my sonar is giving me 60% degraded performance, what are we doing? We still are importing technologies. Forget the technology, even the know-how, how to deploy is also being borrowed from them or learned from them. And you can take up any project if it is successful. So unless we do indigenous effort in terms of acoustic capacity and capability building, we are not going anywhere. And this is where the regional powers have to come together, find an indigenous solution. The second is a vertical construct. We have very little understanding of our conditions. So a lot of sensing, analysis, and then regulation. I don't want to name organizations, but very respected organizations are getting the entire framework from the West, whereas our conditions are totally different. Even policy, when we get from there, or the complete deployment pattern, we can only keep giving waivers and forget what's actually going on the ground. Now, just to dissect the bigger UDA framework into smaller portions, like underwater radiated noise, just to give you an example. Underwater radiated noise is very important for the Navy in terms of, we call it acoustic stealth, right? We don't want to be detected, and we want to detect quickly. Second is acoustic habitat degradation. The underwater noise in the low frequency because of shipping has been doubling every decade since 1951. That is the data that we have from 1951. But experts say from the pre-industrial era, after the Industrial Revolution. And even if you just look at the data, in spite of all your technological advances, the shipping noise has not reduced, because that has never been the priority area. It is only now. I mean, even in UNCLOS, they have talked about, sorry, not UNCLOS, UNDP, they have way back in 82, they have talked about hazards of underwater noise. But nothing has happened. IMO in the Kobe Convention in 2002, they first time took it as an agenda item, and now also it is being discussed. Because there is no lobby to push. I mean, if you just compare it with the Ballast Water Treaty, there is no lobby to push this. So it is just going on as a discussion. And even when our paper was being processed, I mean, we were being seen as enemies of the shipping community. It took me 1.5 years to get that paper processed. I mean, of course, government systems have their own time, but I mean, we were being seen as an enemy to that community. I mean, I had to go to individual members to convince them that whatever your concerns are being addressed. Other part is sediment management. I mean, there are so many examples I can take. I've just taken 2 of them. Sediment management. The sediment transport pattern in the tropical waters is completely different from the temperate and the polar region. No waterway navigation can happen. Even our coastal navigation cannot happen, or even our port management cannot happen unless you understand the sediment transport pattern. So if we understand and get that capability, it will serve everybody. This is what is pooling of resources and synergizing of effort. The entire UDA framework. Now, how do you get it done? User academia industry partnership, or, you know, I mean, I'm just taking an Indian case, but I think this is relevant to any country in the region. There are already schemes, Make in India, Skill India, Startup India, Digital India, and even other countries, multilateral forums, bilateral forums have all of it already built in. You don't need any new schemes to implement UDA. And these are some of the specific core requirements or expertise that are required. So moment you are able to take care of all of it, the output of this funnel is policy intervention, technology intervention, and capacity and capability building. That's the whole UDA framework all about. And it will serve all these stakeholders that are mentioned. Sediment classification, for whether it is water resource management, you can name it. Whole lot of stakeholders can be served. And port management, oil and gas, inland water transport, everything is underwater search and recovery. Marine spatial planning. I want to put special mention on this. I mean, the whole digital transformation in the underwater domain. This map, this is what went to IMO, is built out of the AIS data. The entire Indian Ocean region is seen here. The entire region was divided into smaller grids, 1 lat long. So it's about 12.5 kilometers by 12.5 kilometer grid. We picked up the shipping data from AIS, built the underwater noise generated by each ship. Each grid was taken as one single unit. Then the entire tropical channel was mapped or modeled. And then you get the underwater noise because of the shipping in the region. And you can see it matches to the realistic thing. But this map can be used, not only that, you know, I'm not here to say that stop shipping, but you can definitely, I mean, this is, you can see post the piracy, the whole shipping lane has shifted, and the impact that it has on the acoustic habitat degradation. So I'm not saying you can stop, but with this kind of data, this is real-time data. the AIS data comes every 5 minutes, so this can produce, I mean, today computational capabilities are quite significant. This gives you a map which is updated every 6 minutes. With this kind of finer data, I mean, at least during the ecologically sensitive months for certain species, you can divert the shipping, or you can have I mean, policymakers can take decisions when you have such data available to you. There are naval officers, you can even do your submarine deployment with this kind of data. Any underwater deployment can be done through this. What I'm trying to tell you is, you develop the capabilities, so many stakeholders can benefit. And I have a problem when the Navy say, I've been a naval officer myself, that data is sensitive. So let me tell you, so much data is available if somebody understands the domain. So much is available without you sharing the data. So don't create this bogey of data security. If you do not cooperate, you will not get solutions for yourself also. Now, the UDA framework, policy intervention, we have to get into a proper policy framework, right? I mean, what UNCLOS says and a whole lot of things, and then it translates to regional forums, bilateral relations, and then also SOPs for organizations. I mean, it has to be done with a data-driven and with much better understanding. The second is technology intervention. I think MSP would be the most critical technology intervention that is required. It will serve everybody. I mean, we have even built an underwater tool, digital tool for shrimp farming, for seaweed farming, for common carps in the freshwater systems. Because it's only underwater parameters that are going to make sure the growth of these species. So once you understand the whole digital domain, you can do so much more. Translating every parameter into once it comes on the digital platform, today there is enough data analytics capabilities available. And of course, we have to do field validation for the tropical waters. And these are all homegrown. This is not, I mean, for us, even we don't use a software, we write the program, we code it ourselves. And acoustic capacity and capability building. We'll quickly take few examples. Now we need to dissect, when we say UDA, what does it mean? How will you implement it? I call it to see, to understand, and to share. What is to see? It is the hardware, it is the sensor and the platform which will carry the sensor to the desired location. Now this is to dissect. When you want help, when you want to collaborate, or when you talk about partnership for what? It is not the entire package and I just need the 10% of it. So the sensors, platforms, whatever, I mean, it can be a static platform, it can be a moving platform. To understand is the key. It includes the entire digital analysis, right from pre-processing, processing, and the post-processing. Now, this is where we have to have a complete control, otherwise we have a strategic compromise. If the understand part is completely outsourced, you're finished. We give away everything that we call of strategic importance. And the third is to share. How to make it available to the user in real time for actionable input. Whether it is a policymaker who needs to take in certain policy decisions, or an operational level, or even for a common person. Now, to a fisherman, you can't give him a display, right? You have to give him a mobile app. Today, everything is possible. And how do we customize that? I mean, we've done this for shrimp farming and seaweed farming, as I mentioned. He needs specific input, whether it is a feeding cycle where his intervention is required and what intervention, it should be very specific. Now, this is where I call that this region, Indian Ocean region can, I mean, even Sri Lanka has got young population, aspirational population, and they're very, very intelligent. And India, of course. We have built the complete framework. Now, this is where it is important. What I showed you there, it is not about just deploying sensors to collect data. You first model it. I mean, the picture that I showed you, modeling and simulation has to be the basis for MSP. You model the whole place. You do field validation only in specific location. Then only it is viable. Otherwise, how can developing countries pay that kind of money? It is not affordable. It is not viable. and of course the source path receiver model, specific to every application we have to build. And when the tropical water is behaving in such a unique manner, we have to map that. And our application has to be extremely specific. So the Americans had started talking about the shallow water acoustic measurement, SWAMS exercise. Now, SWAMS across the world, I mean, I just want to give you a sense of how the UD has evolved across the world. You know, the SOCIUS was probably the first system. Just after the Second World War, 1958, they started this program, and you know, in its peak, there were 30 stations of SOCIUS. They called it IUSS, and there were different names. But towards the end of the Cold War, 30 came down to 3 because, you know, again, that was a different era. And so I want to remind democracies that the Cold War era was different, when the Americans could, even they themselves now get questioned. I mean, the national security gets questioned even for environmental issues. So today when our navies say that exclusive systems have to be built for them, I'm sorry, it is not geopolitically viable. In America also, just after the Cold War, they got questions for funding, they got questions for environmental clearances, they got even, there were naval projects which had to submit environment impact statements. That is the reality of the world. How come this part of the world doesn't understand that? You have to have a pooling of resources and synergizing of effort. Security establishment cannot, I mean, of course, look at the financial sector. Data is equally critical for them, but they are operating in an open system, in an open environment, and technology provides you that. You have to apply your mind. So after SOCIUS, Point Sur Lighthouse was another thing which was driven by Naval Postgraduate School, Monterey. And this was another absolutely high-tech underwater lab where, you know, field validation was done, modeling was done, enough research was going on there, and that gave a lot of systems to the US military establishment or the naval establishment. But after the Cold War ended, that 10 years period in the last century, you know, the Americans also got a bit relaxed. But towards the end of the last century, they realized that the Chinese have developed significant capabilities and they can challenge the might of the Americans. So that's when, in this beginning of this century, Asia-X was launched. It was a purely academic exercise funded by the Office of Naval Research for data collection and modeling in the South China Sea and East China Sea. And Asia-X is a very remarkable exercise because the Chinese also knew what was going on. But they, yes sir, 2 minutes more. So Asia-X, I will not go into the details of it, but this was a remarkable thing. And then, I mean, Asia-X was in the beginning of this century, and after 15 years, the Chinese announced what is called Underwater Great Wall Project. And Asia-X was definitely part of the sequence. I mean, what was announced in the Underwater Great Wall Project definitely is a work of at least 20-25 years. So there is a very direct connection between the two. So the Chinese have been really investing significantly in terms of their underwater capabilities. Now, geopolitically, it has to be a regional approach, stakeholder integration. I mean, I call it this underwater domain awareness framework as a structural, comprehensive and inclusive framework. And I think this must become an agenda for all bilateral and multilateral platforms that we have anywhere in the world. So, I mean, this is my quick recommendation that geopolitically it has to be on a larger, and capacity building must get the priority. Problem solving will be done by the government agencies, but the larger collaboration should be on capacity building. And greater public good, as I mentioned, will get, I think MSP can be a game changer in that. And small island nations will definitely benefit significantly if we have coalitions on MSP. So, only way forward is outreach, engage, sustain. I mean, this is an outreach where I can sensitize, or where more people can get sensitized on UDA. Once the initial sensitization happens, engaging at multiple levels, multiple internships and fellowships for young people who can take this forward, giving them specific problems. And then, of course, sustaining it with certain long-term projects, whether for technology intervention or policy intervention. A center of excellence, this is a model on which we work. Research, multidisciplinary research, startup ideas or incubation center, innovation keeps getting talked about. Each of those blocks that you see in the UDA framework can be populated in each one of them. And of course, skilling. I mean, many people, I mean, I can talk about even naval officers do not have the understanding of the local conditions. Academic centers, there has to be, in academic institutions, I don't see a single institution which has acoustics as a program. And strategic center. So we run this platform, my last slide, UDA Digest, if you go, just type UDA Digest, you will get, there are more than 100 articles which, gives you a sense of the different dimensions of UDA. There is a knowledge center, there are 150 research notes, and we are now started populating the innovation notes, and also case studies. It is under the Harvard University model where, real world problem solving is given in a proper way. And then we have a UDA dialogue page where there's we have done a lot of programs, all that audio video is available, expert talks are there. And then this is the last one is the learning center. We have made a series of e-learning modules, 10 of them, they have been uploaded in the Indian government website, but to sensitize all the bureaucrats and diplomats, but also it is available to anyone who is interested, you can write to us. And this is going to be populated by another series of 6 more e-learning modules, each of them having 15 sub-modules. So this is the Marine Spatial Planning platform we have built. This is a complete digital tool. You can actually solve every problem here. I mean, you can just click and you will get a map for that. The entire thing has not been populated, but this is the comprehensive work that we are working on. I mean, you will get, for each of the applications, you can click and get what you want. I mean, this is a real-time tool that has been built. I think I will not spend too much time. This is the last slide for your consumption. I think I've explained everything. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Very comprehensive presentation, and you covered a lot of technical points, sonar and biodiversity. I also agree, sharing of data is very important, not keep it in isolation. So next, our panelist is Rear Admiral Dimuthu Gunawardena from the Navy, former Acting Director General and Director of Communication and Publications at the Institute of National Security Studies, Sri Lanka, specialized in naval communicator with vast experience in regional maritime security matters. Dimuthu, floor to you, please.
Thank you very much, sir, for your kind introduction. Good evening to all of you, members of the Diplomatic Corps, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Let me firstly thank the co-chairs of the PFIOSC Phase 3 for organizing this very timely and valuable discussion, and also to Chairman of the Pathfinder Foundation in Sri Lanka, Ambassador Bernard Gunathilaka in particular, for giving me this opportunity to address this August gathering. Within the greater scope of maritime domain awareness, however, underwater domain awareness is a new and emerging concept that has stimulated the interest of maritime analysts all over the globe. It rests on the idea that modern-day technology has rendered the sea transparent, making it possible for maritime agencies to track undersea activity. The technologies that underpin the concept are in the early stages of development, and naval planners are still grappling with its numerous challenges and dimensions. As you already heard, the degradation of sonars that we get from, and other equipment that we get from the West is not at all suitable for our tropical waters. So adequate understanding of the underwater domain is also crucial to build and maintain Sri Lanka's historical commitments to keeping the Indian Ocean a zone of peace. The Indian Ocean as a zone of peace was a declaration initiated by Sri Lanka at the 26th UN General Assembly in 1971, envisaging the great power rivalries both in the surface and underwater domains of the Indian Ocean. Then, that was between USSR and USA, and now. A few minutes ago, Dr. Das has quite rightly pointed out that acoustics is the most effective means for underwater domain awareness. And as mentioned, we hardly see acoustic capacity and capability building in the larger MDA initiative. And he mentioned about 4 main stakeholders, which include strategic security, blue economy, sustainability and climate change risk management, science and technology. Now in my presentation, I will look at the Sri Lankan perspective of mainly 2 stakeholders, the strategic security and the blue economy, which includes science and technology as well as up to a certain extent. The importance of knowing the activities that are taking place in the country's ocean space is a very critical factor in ensuring maritime security and thereby national security. The Sri Lankan ocean space comprised of an EEZ that is 8 times larger than the land, and the claimed continental margin around 21 times larger than the land, and a search and rescue region about 27 times larger than the land area. Apart from the various responsibilities assigned to sea areas, the strategic location of Sri Lanka in the Indian Ocean not only make the island a vital connecting node for the east-west maritime traffic, but has the potential to monitor the entire ocean space that spans to the southern tip of the globe. By every means, it shows that it is a huge area to conduct effective surveillance by utilizing assets and sensors to prevent the ocean space used by illegal actors and also to ensure it is not exploited by others. Having fought and won a separatist war, as mentioned by the chair, which lasted for over 3 decades and bringing peace to the country in 2009, the Sri Lanka Navy had many experiences in fighting LTT Sea Tiger Wing, which included an underwater attack group that was successful in destroying many ships and craft with underwater suicide saboteurs, a few submersible vehicles, and various types of sea mines. Realizing the geopolitical contest in the Indian Ocean, which impacts Sri Lanka, the Sri Lanka Navy expanded its fleet considerably to a blue water capability from what it was, and began commissioning larger fleet assets equivalent to patrol frigates, which is termed as advanced offshore patrol vessels. However, the sensors and platforms the Sri Lanka Navy is in possession today is only capable of conducting maritime surveillance on surface. Apart from this limited capability, we are completely blind on subsurface activities that take place in terms of submarine operations. It should also be noted that except Sri Lanka, all other nations in the neighborhood have acquired submarines to their naval fleets, Bangladesh being the latest to induct 2 in late 2016. Another challenge that we Sri Lankans experience is that even though being an island nation, the country itself has a very little understanding on the ocean, its resources, threats, and generally on the maritime and underwater domain to improve the island's engagement with the sea. Therefore, we have to urgently build capacity for undersea awareness and overcome the maritime blindness that we experience today. This is not only important to detect submarines, but also to monitor vital undersea data cables which connect the island to the world, as a treaty obligation since Sri Lanka is a signatory to the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea. Notwithstanding above, with respect to acoustic capacity and capability building, the Navy has been training personnel, both officers and sailors, on anti-submarine warfare since the times of Royal Ceylon Navy in friendly countries like India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. And hence, the Navy is in possession of qualified staff amounting to approximately 100 officers and about 2,500 sailors at any given time to operate ASW anti-submarine warfare equipped platforms. Meanwhile, the Naval Research and Development Unit, which is the marine wing functioning under the Center for Defense Research and Development of the Ministry of Defense, is also carrying out extensive research work on a project to indigenously manufacture an underwater acoustic sensor array with some limited resources in order to detect submarines, underwater vehicles, and intruders. Sri Lanka Navy in the future will look at ways to expand additional capabilities to existing ships where possible, like the possibility of including systems such as towed array sonars on existing frigates. Plans are also underway to purchase a Reliance-class US Coast Guard cutter in mid-2025 with complete ASW capabilities, which will enhance the UDA of Sri Lanka Navy considerably for the first time. So today we just heard from the US Ambassador that the fourth one is also in line. So fourth one will also have ASW capabilities. So gradually we will build on ASW capabilities. Having said that on security, let's look at UDA and its economic dimensions. Despite the fact that Sri Lanka is aligned with a number of international initiatives, including the 2022 UN Biodiversity Conference of the parties to the UN Convention on Biological Diversity, COP15, the Indian Ocean Rim Association, the UNDP, and the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, it seems that countries' sustainable blue economic investments are largely absent from the global disclosure on blue economic development, on considering Sri Lanka's ocean economic contribution to the national economy, in comparison to other maritime countries such as Bangladesh, which has relatively small maritime zone than Sri Lanka. So let's look at a few initiatives where Sri Lanka has made progress in this context. Fisheries. Taking into consideration Sri Lanka's exploitation of the blue resources, the fishing sector brings in a significant amount of foreign exchange, contributing to 2.7% of the country's gross domestic product. Sri Lanka being an island nation, the level of exploitation of pelagic fishery resources, that is coastal fisheries with 10 to 100 meters depth of water, is much high and accounts for a major portion of food security in Sri Lanka. As the fishery is more economical and of high nutrition value, overfishing is rampant in certain areas, and it needs to be regulated before such fish stocks diminish from our waters. In order to estimate the fishery stock availability surrounding our coastal waters, the methodology used earlier was the physical calculation of fish catch at landing sites which are over 900 with large fishing communities, making this method cumbersome and impracticable. The fishery-dependent method has now been replaced by fishery-independent method called biomass estimation method, where EK-15 echo sounders fitted to survey ships gather the information required using acoustic data for analysis. Hence, precise baseline information is now obtained on fishery stocks availability, and in the future, more sustainable fishing harvest could be expected once restrictions and regularization of fishing takes into effect. When it comes to hydrography, the National Hydrographic Act number 7 of 2024 came into force just at the beginning of this month on 2nd February. So one of the objects of the National Hydrographic Office established in 2023, December 23, is to improve hydrographic survey techniques, data processing methods, and technologies used in the field. The office is empowered to provide necessary consultancy and other assistance for the development activities, including laying of pipelines, undersea cable systems, and establishment of mineral extraction wells, and to preserve data and information regarding such activities. The office shall also create and manage and maintain a database of all hydrographic survey data, marine data, and hydrospatial data collected. Taking technical safeguards is also responsibility of this office. So legal green light given for revenue generation from nautical charts, that is electronic navigation charts and nautical publications, as it is within the jurisdiction of the respective coastal nation as per International Hydrographic Organization standards. And Sri Lanka is now a chart-producing nation, having internationally published 6 electronic navigational charts. At any given time, the Navy is in possession of approximately 34 officers in hydrography and about 120 sailors. Then our claim for continental shelf, extended continental shelf. As the audience would be aware, a coastal state exercises over the continental shelf sovereign rights for the purpose of exploring it and exploiting its natural resources, minerals, and other non-living resources of the seabed and subsoil together with living organisms. In this backdrop, Sri Lanka presented its technical and scientific data and other material to the UN Commission on the limits of the continental shelf to establish the outer limits of the continental shelf beyond EEZ on 8 May 2009. The area claimed by Sri Lanka has potential overlapping areas with India, Myanmar, Bangladesh, and Maldives, and hence a subcommission was appointed and directed to limit the claim to 350 nautical miles, for which Sri Lanka has objected. So many discussions are taking place up and down with the subcommission. India has also meanwhile objected to the Sri Lanka's claim in October 2022 and needs to be settled bilaterally. Meanwhile, Sri Lanka has made a second submission to UNCLS for an area southwest of Sri Lanka in addition. Then when it comes to academic advancement, or we can say outreach, technical higher education institutes like the University of Moratuwa in Sri Lanka has tested underwater unmanned exploration vehicles basically to gather information regarding water temperature, salinity, and opacity by installing corresponding sensors and research work for improving progress. So as energy is concerned, petroleum exploration, hydrocarbon exploration for oil and gas has been conducted over the years, covering the ocean area right around Sri Lanka. Accordingly, considerable amount of seismic data indicating significant potential for both natural gas and oil in 4 Sri Lankan sedimentary basins has been gathered. Offshore wind farms, renewable energy. According to a study report done by the World Bank Group in 2020, the technical potential of having 3 offshore wind power plants in Sri Lanka, in Northwest, Mana Basin and Hambantota to provide 92 gigawatts to the national grid has been shown. So that also we collect underwater data. Then multi-petroleum product pipeline between India and Sri Lanka, Indo-Lankan energy linkage, a 600-kilometer Nagapatnam, India, Jaffna, Sri Lanka pipeline project has been mooted by India in 2023 as a cost-effective solution for India to support the Sri Lanka's energy market. The project is envisaged to pump petrol, diesel, and kerosene to Sri Lanka via an undersea pipeline. Project has about 65-70 kilometers subsea segment. Then there is a proposed high voltage direct current interconnectivity between India and Sri Lanka for a 1,000 megawatt power transfer, and that is also on the pipeline with a 60-kilometer stretch of the venture on both sides under sea. Then offshore mineral exploration is also going on, and the data has been gathered only in a few locations in the southwest and the north. Mapping of the continental shelf around Sri Lanka is yet to be carried out by the Geological Survey and Mines Bureau and remains a vital requirement. And undersea telecommunications as a key enabler in the initiative of achieving the move towards an inclusive digital economy and a smart Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka has been connected with the globe with 6 submarine communication cables owned by 3 operators. And at the micro and microeconomic level, submarine cables of communication will reduce transaction cost, increase market coverage and competitiveness, and give job opportunities and income generation. In addition, it will foster economic growth and development through affordable, reliable, and seamless global communications. So the way forward for Sri Lanka needs a cultural policy and expertise shift to build affinity to the oceans and improve the island's engagement with the sea. Education on oceans and its much valued resources, challenges and opportunities need to be included from primary classes in schools, which will bring about a change to the top leadership, secretaries and government officials at every strata for administration and governance. Continue allocation of budget for underwater domain awareness at all sectors in order that an institutionalized framework could be initiated at all levels: security, academic, fishery, energy sectors, etc. Multidisciplinary research and innovation has to be encouraged in the academia and research institutes of UDA, especially on underwater unmanned vehicles. To improve Sri Lanka's credibility as an honest broker of UDA, country needs to upscale the capacity of relevant departments in the Sri Lanka Navy and the Ministry of Foreign Relations. It is also crucial to support the work of national think tanks, undertaking research on the maritime domain and territory educational institutes offering programs in subjects such as maritime law, maritime security, oceanography, and maritime economics. Underwater data sharing among the institutions within Sri Lanka and among regional countries without compromising national security for improving of awareness in the UDA of the Indian Ocean, as multilateral collaboration enable partners to leverage each other's strengths and capabilities. Then we can have dialogues and discussions in obtaining bilateral and multilateral assistance from especially regional countries and organizations for technology transformation and assistance in acoustic capacity and capability building, including setting up a center of excellence, as mentioned by the lead speaker. It should be noted that at the Indian Ocean Rim Association, when Sri Lanka chaired, the 6 priority areas of blue economy, maritime security and fisheries management were included. Furthermore, in line with its latest vision statement, Sagar, India can play a leading role in capacity and capability building for the regional countries of the IOR to realize the digital transformation in the underwater domain manifested as maritime spatial planning, which is a process that brings together multiple uses of the ocean, including energy, industry, government, conservation, and recreation to make informed and coordinate decisions about how to use marine resources sustainably. The good news is that UNDP, together with the government of Sri Lanka, has recently conducted the high-level stakeholder consultation on developing a roadmap towards maritime spatial plan, which is expected to be launched in the coming months. As the country's economic meltdown has affected the progress of carrying out research, procurement of technology instruments, ships, etc. in every aspect, to improve awareness of the subsea areas surrounding the island, it is envisaged that within a couple of years, Sri Lanka would be in a better position to positively progress in UDA. A viable proposal would be the government to establish a government focal point to oversee and manage Sri Lanka's blue resources through maritime spatial planning, the oceanic tool for a sustainable management of maritime areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Dimuthu. Your presentation, you were sharing your experiences, the Navy future plans, how we are going to do SW activities being SW expert, and not a, you're a communicator, no? Yeah. And the next presenter, the panelist online, He is Professor Jeffrey Payne. He is Research Fellow, Academic Affairs Manager at the National Defense University near East NISA Center for Strategic Studies in Washington, D.C., and expert on maritime security and policy. Professor, over to you.
Well, thank you very much. Good to see you again, Admiral. It's a pleasure to be here. My thanks to the Pathfinder Foundation for leading this event. And I honestly am in very august company. I think all of the panelists, I've probably forgotten more about the maritime domain than I could possibly ever learn. But I will do my best to provide some comments and from a vantage point here in Washington. With the normal caveat that I'm here on my personal capacity, not my hat with the NISA Center. So my views, but let me start by saying a lot the DOS related to not only the importance of UDA and how it is a sort of something that everyone is jumping into and starting to pay attention to, but there's not a systematic really rolling up the sleeve, so to speak, on approaching it systematically and cooperatively and in consultation among not only state stakeholders, but among all the various stakeholders throughout the private sector, academic community, and so forth. So the kind of initial point I wanted to, at least the vantage point of the United States, is that for us, UDA is an indication of essentially a problem set when it comes to the comprehensive challenge of domain awareness in general, not even going into the underwater realm, but just understanding what's happening in the world around us, building engagement around that knowledge, and then therefore developing policy and approaches from that accumulation of data. The US has recognized that in a lot of ways the toothpaste is out of the tube, so to speak. So concepts like maritime domain awareness in general, which has rightfully been pointed out, has traditionally been the purview of security services, the Navy, Coast Guards, other maritime constabularies, is no longer the case. There are not only a host of private interests from fishing communities, the shipping industry, some laboratories and academic institutions, but also increasingly the technological realm, where the markets that are associated for innovation when it comes to certain domains has really exploded. So the U.S. Recognizing a transformation, in essentially the perspective towards domain awareness, has been seeking to catch up, and you've seen that over the course of multiple administrations. It's not just a Biden administration thing. It's not just a Trump administration thing. It goes all the way back, really, to the Bush administration, and then onward fair. And the approach now is an interagency approach throughout the United States government, with trying to create a map of all the various stakeholders just in the United States to start with. ESG input, data that has been accumulated, all of the experimentation being done, and how to not only connect it together, but to develop a U.S. approach towards it, and then from there, developing essentially policy guidelines and regulations. So the U.S. interagency involved encourage grant writing, incubation, public-private partnerships to harness a lot of these things so that this data can be accumulated and that our policymakers can adequately understand it. I think one of the things that Dr. Das emphasized very, very clearly in his presentation and in his paper was that there is a technical reality to not only MDA, but especially UDA, that is very, very difficult to jump into as a policymaker if you do not have the background. So there's an educational component to this, And who better to educate than the actual people who are developing this data, who are wrestling with these challenges on a day-to-day basis and figuring out a way to emphasize the importance to the policymaker. That's not an easy thing to do. So for the United States, that's one of the aspects that has been explored. Inside the Department of Defense itself, many of you have probably heard mention of the Defense Innovation Unit, which is an institution that was set up for a whole variety of reasons, but they're very, very involved in the development of domain awareness and developing it for a U.S. construct and using the mechanism of public-private partnerships. The U.S. is learning that in some cases the private sector is much more agile, is much more comprehensively aware, in some cases can even dive deeper than government institutions can. So partnering with them is a way to not only develop our own capabilities further, but to expand the community of interest. The second challenge from a Washington point of view is not only how to develop this internally inside the United States, but working with our partners and allies around the world on developing this. I cannot echo all of the panelists enough in saying that for the Indian Ocean region, for South Asia specifically, it has to be a locally driven approach, not only something that the IOR states communally define as what their priorities are when it comes to UDA, but also the capability development should be driven by the interests of the region. And so in this respect, the U.S. is also trying to wrap its head around how best can we plug in that? How best can we learn? How best can we cooperate and coordinate to assist in a comprehensive, more stable and more secure surface as well as underwater domain? And it has been rightfully pointed out that this has sometimes been a lesson that has been slowly learned by the United States, but it is something that certainly is being learned. The additional kind of remaining comments I wanted to make before I turn it over to question and answer session, which I think would be very enlightening, is essentially the incubation process when it comes to UDA. I think all of the panelists, but especially Dr. Das, emphasized bringing in youth, making that a component of innovation, of incubation. That is something I think that really all interested parties and taking it from the perspective of Sri Lanka is something that kind of is the sky is the limit, so to speak, because of the increasingly low threshold by which innovators can jump into the market and can start exploring things is absolutely essential to encourage. And the encouragement doesn't have to be substantial. It does not have to necessarily be a competent change in policy. It doesn't have to comprehend a change in technology policy or maritime policy. It can be pilot programs that show proof of concept that can then be scaled up and latched onto what exists already in an interagency of a state, so that things like these apps that are effective ways of not only getting the information, but sharing the information and centralizing the information can be developed. I've sat on similar kind of experiments with youthful entrepreneurs or students of technology, and the sort of things that the way they approach the problem set is much different than I say a lot of us who are security professionals or academics would approach those same problem sets. And it's wonderful to have their voices in it. But that leads me to my kind of final two questions for this entire body. One, and something from the US mindset, is the issue of how we share information. Because this has historically been associated with the security realm, there is this hesitation on how to share information. And there is if we are going to share information, we're going to do it through a kind of government approved mechanism, such as the fusion centers. That's absolutely true and absolutely important and should not be foregone or jettisoned. However, as Dr. Das emphasized, and I would also agree, I think we're largely in agreement, sir, that the amount of data you can accumulate on your territorial waters and what even is underneath them with complete open source tools and some basic machine learning. And I am not a software programmer. I am not a coder. The kind of data that I can accumulate on my personal laptop is amazing and something that I could not do 10 years ago. And so, again, this returns to my point about the toothpaste being out of the tube to a degree. That we have to wrestle with the idea that this data is being built from a whole variety of sources. And what we need to do is right now it's chaos. And that chaos is not necessarily a bad thing. So many more people are jumping into these questions, jumping into this conversation. How do we link them together? One component of the center, it could be a center of excellence. Some concerns about, because I have to dive in deeper into what you comes to a center of excellence. Is it a centralized system, or is it more a disparate kind of kind of pronged approach for linking this community? But also the voices from industry, the voices from academia, the voices from coastal communities and the communities who are tied to the sea and what they're seeing, as well as environmental NGOs and others. There's a lot of different parties here. The good news is that it is starting to come together. And this data, I think, is the key point. I think when you break it down from a US point of view, and I'll conclude with this, is that the idea of domain awareness is not something that is owned by a government. It is not something that is even owned within an aspect of a government. It is a societal, if not global, challenge, as well as a global and societal opportunity. And so for that, the way and how to share information, some of the concerns, while at the same time recognizing what are the principal realities that are key for national security. But the idea of security cooperation through information sharing cannot progress until there's trust. I think a mechanism, an underlying theme of Dr. Das's presentation is that data can provide us some level of trust. The data itself is what we can trust. We can accumulate it ourselves and compare it in a peer-reviewed process and say, yeah, we're all getting the same data, so let's build off that. And I think that is a way to push things forward in a cooperative fashion versus getting locked up in what could be a very, very complicated political process where everyone's patterns and everyone's situational specifics have to be accounted for. This is something that the U.S. is, again, struggling with and navigating just like every other state, no matter their level of interest, no matter their level of development. And the data seems to be a key mechanism to go forward. So with that, I would like to conclude my comments with my great gratitude for allowing me to join. And again, my thanks to the good Admiral. Good to see you again, sir, as well as Dr. Das and the Vice Admiral for their comments before me. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. You're very comprehensive, even though we had little technical issues also when you are speaking to us. But anyway, you have tried to emphasize the US perspective towards the underwater domain. You all also have experienced the same thing in your country. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I think time is little limited now, but the floor is open for question and answer or any comments. Yes, please.
I'm General Reddy. My question is about what all the panelists have spoken about, need to build collective capacity in the region to address this challenge of underwater domain. And there is no denial of this need to build collective capacity to address this challenge. But the real challenge is to arrive at a political consensus amongst all the nations which are impacted. This political consensus is hinging upon the trust deficit being addressed, the different core national interests being aligned, and then only the collective capacity building is feasible. So my question is to the panelists, anyone can take it on. How do we address this issue of political consensus amongst all the stakeholder nations in the region?
Sir, I beg to differ because for capacity building, I don't think we need any political intervention. I mean, individual organizations, individuals can definitely, I mean, I'm even surprised academic institutions are not taking it up. I mean, this is the future. I mean, because we have a mindset that, you know, only like in India, I see a lot of people moving towards IT industry, whereas now IT industry is almost getting dead. But still, you know, people are moving towards that. So it is definitely, I mean, as Ambassador Shivshankar Menon had also mentioned, you know, Pathfinder being real Pathfinder, in the sense that you have to sense what is, I mean, if we are trying to solve yesterday's problem today, then there is a problem. I mean, I don't think for this we need any political intervention. I mean, nobody's going to prevent you from kind of getting into capacity building at any level. I mean, I gave you a spectrum of what are the issues. So it is for you to make a choice and move forward. I mean, why do we even need political intervention in this? I mean, most of the time, political intervention has only spoiled the thing. So we don't need to worry about political intervention.
I will just clarify, it is not political intervention, political consensus. Because unless there is political consensus of stakeholder nations, the pooling and sharing of resources is not feasible. So in that context is my question to you.
No, I think capacity building has to be, doesn't need political involvement. I mean, that is at a higher level where data sharing needs to be done between nations or bilaterally. But capacity building, I didn't have the time to go through a lot of things, like even things like fisheries, aquaculture. There is no political intervention required. I mean, people have to, even corporates can come together. And I think now the global community, I mean, particularly if I can talk about India, the private sector is doing a lot more. So I don't think political intervention is required. There is not much of control now. I mean, after the liberalization in India also, there is a lot that the private sector is doing and contributing in a big way. So it is just, I think, not just political will, it is a personal will to kind of embrace new ideas and new things and move forward. Because many of us do talk about being liberal, but you know, we still look for government support, which is not going to take us forward. I mean, so it is more of personal will than political will, I would say.
Also, I'll add to him, because now we have IORA, we have BIMSTEC, SAARC, all these are, you know, pulled together, synergized together, and I think look into this matter. It's not the political concerns. I think capacity building is individual concerns, because, you know, it's a threat for everyone underwater. So I think these organizations are very clearly demarcated, you know, their responsibilities. Any other comments or questions?
So I am Colonel Nalin Herath, acting DG of Institute of National Security. So now with all these analysis, now we can see that all the state parties heavily engage with all these underwater domain activities, and there's a huge potential of more involvement of non-state actors also. This question open to entire panel. So now we have seen the involvement of non-state actors in the ground warfare. There's a big challenge that the way how much they are protecting or respect the international humanitarian law, such kind of things, or international law. So how do you see the future potential of non-state actors engaging this underwater domain activities or maybe underwater warfare? Thank you, sir.
Yeah, I think now being, having gone through the 30th war, also we saw the LTT being a non-state actor resorting to underwater methods. So we might be able to see it in the Red Sea issue also, or in many other countries which will have non-state actors coming up. So I think to overcome that, as we all discussed, we should build affinity to the oceans and get the whole country sort of involved and see the potential, what the potential, the resources, the threat, what the undersea could bring to us. So by doing so, even the security forces now, as I said, like we were also soon after the war, we were concentrating mainly on surface ships, and we were concentrating on surface threats or dominating the EEZ and all that, but we completely neglected the undersea, subsea activities, including the threats. So gradually, as you see, we are building up, the next ship that is going to come with ASW capabilities, maybe the next other ships that are going to come, we will be getting ASW capabilities. So by getting, by each country getting themselves equipped with ASW capabilities, we should be able to counter any non-state actor threat. That is the only thing. So long as we delay, we will get the non-state actors going to that domain, underwater domain, and becoming a threat to all the littoral countries in the Indian Ocean, which will be a big threat. I hope I answered your questions. Yeah.
I just want to bring another dimension to it. Moment you talk about non-state actors, there are no rules for them, so they can do whatever they feel, and there's a lot of disruptive technologies available with them. So, I think our maritime forces have to leapfrog to meet the future challenges. There is no discussion on that. But I just want to bring you another aspect, like as Admiral Sir also had mentioned about submarine proliferation in this area. It's more than security, my worry is a safety for everybody. There are countries which are operating nuclear submarines also. You saw the lack of UDA even for the mighty Americans. USS Connecticut met with an accident in the South China Sea. It was not only embarrassing geopolitically for the American establishment, but it only amplifies the requirement of UDA and the complexity of UDA in the tropical waters. That said, the second part is the safety. Now, I want to give you an example of the Argentinian submarine accident that happened and the Indonesian submarine accident that happened. It was poor maintenance. It's a very complex toy you have acquired without the capability. Let me be very, very upfront on this. But imagine something happening. Then the mix of, the deadly cocktail of non-state actors also getting involved, and the political volatility of this region. Something happens, whether by accident or otherwise, a nuclear submarine gets into some difficulty in our waters, then what are we looking at? So it's a serious safety issue. Way back in the peak of the Cold War, the American and the Russian establishment got into what is called a water management treaty. When the eyeball to eyeball became a bit too difficult to handle, they sank submarines on both sides, and at some point they realized that this is too much to handle, so they got into this treaty. So I think in this region also, senior diplomats are here, we need to discuss this issue, that, whatever you want to do, posturing, geopolitical posturing you do, it should not become a safety issue for the larger, and these are highly populated areas. So I also want to, through UDA, I also want to draw your attention towards this kind of possibility. I think I'll stop here.
Ladies, so you want to add something? Ladies and gentlemen, with this answer, we'll conclude the session. Our panelists, this discussion has shed light on the complexity and the importance of the underwater domain awareness in the Indian Ocean region. As we move forward, continued dialogue, collaboration, and investment in underwater domain awareness will be essential for ensuring a secure and prosperous future for the region. Ladies and gentlemen, and once again, thank you very much for the Pathfinder, Ambassador Gunawardena and Ambassador Menon also here now, for providing this opportunity to educate the important subject of underwater, because we have been giving emphasis to maritime domain awareness only. Now, I think a little bit of technical issues and what we are doing, the Sri Lankan capacities and international capacities, and I think we have just given some thoughts and some knowledge, what important with this subject. With that, we conclude once again thanking to the Pathfinder Foundation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. We will now break for tea. I have a small announcement. Professor Chris Alden, who was unable to join us virtually today, has sent his PowerPoint presentation. So we will email it to you all if we have your email addresses. I believe you shared it once you registered. Thank you.
Group photo. Thank you.